Good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call to order the regular city council meeting, successor agency, housing authority for the city council meeting of May 22nd, 2023. And I would ask that Explore Abby Heyman please come forward and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Will you all rise?
Place your hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Explorer. Madam City Clerk, will you please call roll?
Councilmember Garner,
Here.
Councilmember Thorpe,
Here.
Councilmember Venable,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Duncan, Mayor Beaver,
Here.
all present.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. City Manager, is there any changes to the agenda?
No changes, sir.
Thank you, sir. At this time, it's my honor to present a special proclamation, and I would ask that Dulce Haviland please come forward. Are you in the gallery? Dulce? Okay, I'm going to read this, and if she comes in, we'll present this. So, a proclamation of the City of Yucaipa declaring the month of May Ehlers-Danlos Syndromes and Hypermobility Awareness Month. Whereas Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome, or EDS, are a group of 13 heritable connective tissue disorders that together affect 1 in 5,000 people. Each type of EDS has its own set of symptoms, but some features are seen across all types of EDS, including joint hypermobility, skin hyperextensibility, and tissue fragility. And whereas HSD are connective tissue disorders that cause joint hypermobility, instability, injury, and pain, other symptoms such as fatigue, headaches, GI problems, and autonomic dysfunction are also often seen as part of HSD. And whereas there is no cure for any types of EDS or HSD, the conditions are managed by addressing a person's symptoms. EDS and HSD can cause a variety of symptoms in many different areas of the body. So people with these conditions often require multiple providers in different specialties to manage their care. And whereas access to professionals who are knowledgeable about EDS and HSD is limited, and lack of awareness about EDS and HSD across the nation and around the globe stands in the way of the diagnosis, management, and research of these conditions. And whereas awareness about EDS and HSD by both medical professionals and the general public can help improve the lives of people living with EDS and HSD in the city of Yucaipa. And now, therefore, be it resolved that the City Council of the City of Yucaipa hereby declares the month of May 2023 as Ehlers-Danlos Syndromes and Hypermobility Spectrum Disorders Awareness Month. Signed, Yucaipa City Council. That is a multisyllabic proclamation. It's difficult to read. Dulce, are you in the gallery? Can you come forward? This one.
Sorry if I'm late. I couldn't find any parking. Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for taking the time to declare the month of May EDS Awareness Month. My name is Dulce Haviland. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I'm one of, as I know of, 4 people in Yucaipa, Calamasa area. Last year I came with a young lady who had just gotten diagnosed. In her case, which happens a lot, she actually was taken away from her mother. Her mother was accused of child abuse. She was locked in a psychiatric ward. She was kicked out of school, all because nobody knew what was wrong with her. And unfortunately, one of the symptoms of EDS is chronic bruising. So when they saw the chronic bruising and the fatigue and the weight loss, not knowing what it was, the assumption was that maybe her mom's doing something. So one of the reasons I and others raise awareness for EDS awareness is because it's actually more common than people think. It could be as many as 1 in 500 people, but unfortunately, due to lack of awareness, doctors literally don't know how to diagnose this. Just to give an example, a friend of mine's a doctor, and we were talking about this, and she said, I have patients asking me about EDS. I don't even know what the steps are. I don't know who to send them to. I don't know what it looks like. So she has patients that probably have it. She doesn't even know what to do. So one of the reasons, I know the proclamation is very long and we do all of that, is to let people know that it's multisystemic. It affects every organ in your body, your skin, your joints. It causes, if you don't get diagnosed soon enough, disability. I unfortunately spent 30 years not getting diagnosed. And so because of that, I ended up having to go on disability because it was a little too late for me. But the goal of awareness is to ensure that myself, the young lady who was here last time, Maddie, and others can get diagnosed early, that this becomes something that doctors are aware of. Something as simple as when you go, when your kids go to 1st and 2nd grade, they get eye exams and hearing exams. If they included hypermobility exams, just that simple step, you would already have on the books, oh, this person has a history of hypermobility from the age of, 2 or 3 or 4. And it would be amazing to see that progress. And so that's why I'm just here to let you know that we're here and we're trying to get this awareness to teachers, to medical practitioners, to parents, to know that a saying that we use in EDS is, if you can't connect the issues, think connective tissues. So thank you so much for having me here and for doing this. Appreciate it.
Thank you, ma'am. And it's altogether deserving of the recognition and the awareness. I certainly will share this with my colleague on this on the school district, and I hope the gentlemen to my left and right do as well. We'd love to come down here and present this proclamation to you and take our picture with you, if that's okay.
Count of 3. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Let me just do 2 more. So real quick. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Thank you guys.
All right, moving on to public comment. If there are speakers that would like to speak, please fill out a comment card that's located in the back of the room to my right. Hand it to our city clerk over here to my left, and you'll have an opportunity to speak here at the podium. I'm reminding everybody that the time limit for public comment is 3 minutes. And in order to allow for a more orderly public meeting and in keeping with state and local law, the public meetings of the City of Yucaipa Council will, from here on out, be conducted in order and civility in mind. Any person who disrupts, disturbs, or breaks up this meeting will be asked to leave. Under city rules of procedure for the city council meetings, disrupting the meeting includes speaking out of turn, stamping feet, whistles, yells, or similar demonstrations such as clapping. This is a public meeting that will be conducted with civility and decorum, not a sporting event where each side of an issue tries to be louder than the other. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes, as previously stated, and will be strictly adhered to. After consulting with city staff, I've confirmed that seating of time is not allowed. Please remember, we're all neighbors. We are passionate about the agenda for the day. We're passionate about our opinions and beliefs, but we need to treat each other with respect. We will extend courtesy and respect to all those speaking. We ask that you do the same. So our first public speaker is Dr. Hanson Wong, followed by Mr. Arthur Walter.
Good afternoon on this warm afternoon. Name is Hanson Wong, 35150 Court Street, Yucaipa, California. So in order to get my 3 minutes in, first thing is law and order. If we're going to have order in our council meetings, there's 2 things I would ask. One, I don't think political party belongs in this meeting. It has nothing to do with what we talk about. So to accuse someone of being one side or the other, it's their privilege, not something we should accuse them of. Second thing, I think that rebuttals should stay within the public comments or the project. If you bring additional things to the rebuttal, then you're adding comments that theoretically we should be allowed to answer to, but if not, it should at least not be allowed, especially if the rebuttal adds threats to what is there. So, and I think that the last two meetings, my perception was that some of the city council got bullied, and I don't think that's a good thing. We advise our children not to have it allowed, but you were, in my mind, bullied to do what the particular person wanted you to do. You say, what can we do? Well, you told me that we got a great city manager coming in and a great city attorney. I think they should be able to hold things to a point where you don't get bullied to the point where they get whatever they are asking for. I think using seniors to get density bonuses is one thing, but not to address possible dangers to them is another thing. Using students, again, to, and say affordable housing, we need it to get, again, additional density is something else. But again, 10% is only 17.4 apartments. I think we have a greater need than that in the city. If he truly was thinking about affordability, he should have increased that to at least 30 or 50. But again, that's up to him. The project was brought up again because there was a disturbance. I listened to the tape. I didn't really hear a great disturbance, but again, that's my perception, and you could feel differently. There was also a myth that this particular person, entitlement specialist, was intimidated by the crowd in the comments. Those of you who know him, especially our Mayor Pro Tem, knows that he's not a person to be intimidated. So to use that as an excuse, if it was an excuse, should not have been. So I urge you to not be bullied again, because they can get whatever they want as long as they bully you. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Mr. Arthur Walter, followed by Mrs. Colleen Wong.
Mayor, council people. What I'd like to address the council on is the idea of these mandates. I hear this at the end of a lot of the meetings, and what it adds up to is, as long as you're doing, the council is doing, what the state is telling you to do, then you're fine. But if you're not, then all of a sudden you're being intimidated, you're being threatened, you got threats of lawsuits, and they'll take away your ability to take and do anything. Well, guess what? If you are actually being told by the state what needs to be done, why are you guys getting paid? Why don't you just take and quit and let the state take it over? If you're marching in lockstep with the state to take and pass things that you know shouldn't be passed, then why are we here? We ask you to take and look into things, and we know, like the apartment building, that it's in a bad area, it's in a bad spot. If you have a good 800 students into that school, and you're trying to take and work all that traffic out in front of the school, that's a big problem. Not only that, but those roundabouts, that's going to be a total disaster. They take and they won't allow big rigs to go through, they won't allow big dump trucks to go through, and they're taking all the side streets. So students are taking and walking the side streets with the big trucks rolling through, and we're just shuffling it off to different areas. it's still going to be one big bottleneck mess. They brought up the idea that Huntington Beach was being sued. Well, obviously then, they weren't being just taken over by the state. They still had a fight to put back and forth on. Okay? As I say, you're irrelevant at that point. That particular project is in the works for 5 years. 5 years, and so many of the council and everything just wouldn't allow this high density. Suddenly, here we are. Oh yeah, we can have it now. The state is mandating it. We have to do it. Why there? Isn't there any other 8-acre properties around all of Yucaipa to take and put apartments in that it would be a whole lot better? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Colleen Wong, followed by Mrs. Diane Smith.
Colleen Wong, 35150 Court Street. There's been quite a lot of nonsense going around. My son thought it was hysterical that I was being called a liberal. But whatever. What concerns me is corruption, not politics. I watch on the news each night as our president ignores our laws. He has an open southern border, and he knows he can get away with it because he can, because he's the president. He's done quite a bit of ignoring the laws because he knows it will take too long for it to get to the high court. And by the time it gets there, his agenda will, for the most part, be reached. He actually admitted that over this extension of the no eviction issues. It puts our country's security at risk with the border open. It allows illegal drugs to pour into our country, and I can't do anything about that. But watching our city ignore our laws, I can at least say something here. I'm going to read State Law 8314A. It is unlawful for any elected state or local officer, including any state or local appointee, employee, or consultant, to use or permit others to use public resources for campaign activity or personal or other purposes which are not authorized by law. That makes it illegal for you to put your silly myth versus facts on the city webpage. Mr. Mayor, are you supposed to ignore the law? You are in law enforcement. You aren't supposed to say, well, maybe so, but what are you going to do about it? Because that's what it feels like. With all the opposition you are getting from the city communities about your high-density housing proposals and use of one developer, it would stand to reason that the council might pull back or wait or reconsider about why there is so much opposition. However, no, you guys are all in on what it is you want to do. You don't seem to care what anyone wants or thinks, and Mr. Duncan, we know what you hear. It's all blah, 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 blah. You worked very hard to elect your 2 new council members, and you put the city's budget in jeopardy by replacing our city manager as your first act. Now you have to pay a large severance to Mr. Casey. If you count that severance, which is Mr. Casey's salary, and you add in Mr. Mann's salary, we are actually paying $559,420 for a city manager for this year. That is not saving us money. That is before you add in the benefits for both, and that's at least $100,000 a year each.
Thank you for your comments, ma'am. Mrs. Diane Smith, followed by Mrs. Judy Main.
My name is Diane Smith. I live in District 5. Mayor Beaver and council members, an anonymous letter was mailed to everyone who signed the recall petition. Its intent was to intimidate and terrorize the signers of the petition. reminded me of the ghost stories that we used to tell each other around the campfire when we were kids. Your address was printed in the newspaper. All the bad guys now know where you live. Your information can be shared with others who may not have your best interests in mind. Oh, look out. The boogeyman is going to get you. What a lame attempt at intimidation. Everyone knows that anyone can find addresses on the internet. Plus, you make them state their address out loud every time they speak at a council meeting. Addresses are not secret. Navy SEALs are taught if a shark is swimming toward you, don't swim away. Don't act afraid. Stand your ground. And if a hungry shark comes at you for a midday snack, summons up all your strength and punch him in the nose. You are like the hungry sharks waiting to find the poor innocent victim to chow down on. I'm here tonight to tell you, send as many intimidating letters at you as you want. We're going to stand our ground. For every intimidating letter, every false press release, every insulting comment from Bobby Duncan's mouth, I'll be down here at this microphone, symbolically punching the sharks in the nose, and so will a lot of other people. We won't back down.
Thank you. Ms. Judy Main, followed by Ms. Denise Work.
Judy Main, 13630 2nd Street. I have lived here over 30 years, and I totally have enjoyed the park system of Yucaipa. Took our own children to the parks, and now I'm taking grandchildren to the parks. But I have noticed at 7th Street Park that there is a safety issue. And I did give you photos so that it makes it stand out more. If you go up to the corner where the sign that says 7th Street Park, they did not enclose the fencing on that corner. And if you're at the actual park, we have a 2-year-old little grandson. He runs all the way up the hill. He could just go right on out that park, and there's an intersection of 7th Street and Avenue E. It isn't safe for parents with little children. And I've seen parents running up the hill because they don't, if you say, come back, a 2-year-old, he's just going to keep going. And if you have a second child, you're now running up the hill with your other child. It would just be nicer if you could enclose that one corner so that parents don't have to worry about their kids running out. And I'm not sure if this is where I'm supposed to present that or at a park meeting, but if you could pass the information on, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Preciado, you're our Parks and Recreation Liaison. Would you be able to pass that on to our commissioners?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I did make a note of that.
Thank you. Ms. Denise Work, followed by Ms. Cecilia Johns.
Good evening. Denise Work, 37202 Limekiln Drive here in Yucaipa. I just want to address this new sunshine ordinance, which is a great thing that you decided to do that. But if you wish to be more open and transparent, then I wonder why the Freedom of Information Act requests for documents that were put in months ago are continually being stonewalled. Any citizen should be able to submit a written request and expect to receive their records. And several months ago, the sellers, who actually ended up having to hire an attorney to fill them out, have submitted them, you have 10 days to get back. It's gone back and forth now for months, and I don't understand when at the same time, I don't know if you guys even know that that's happening. You're passing a sunshine ordinance, and these requests are being completely ignored. Or they're worse than that, you're getting a letter back that says, too bad. So since the best disinfectant is sunshine, I'm here to hopefully open a window and ask that the city manager and the attorney would turn loose of the requested documents, and that y'all be aware, okay?
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Mr. City Attorney, can you please comment?
Sure. I'm familiar with the public record request that the speaker was discussing. It contained 99 separate categories of requests, which are more individual requests than the city typically receives in a 4-month period. Most of them were compound in that each request didn't ask for one category of documents. Several of the requests asked for 5, 8 more categories of documents. A lot of the categories of documents are exempt or privileged information, or they contain exempt or privileged information under state law. I know that the city clerk has been sending regular correspondence to the requester about the status of the request and has been doing rolling disclosures. So as records become available, they're being sent. When a request comes in that is, again, more individual requests than the city receives in a 4-month time frame, it's reasonable that it'll take the city a little bit of time to respond. So that's the status as I'm aware of it. I'm not aware of any stonewalling. I'm not aware of being told flat no. I'm aware of a routine process for receiving large public record requests. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. And whether it be Ms. Work or Ms. Sellers or anybody else in the audience, if you could please send me an email allowing me to be included on the reply so I can be aware of it and track this progress. I would like for the light to be let into the City Hall. I want to be kept aware of the progress of this Freedom of Information Act. So in order to do that, I think the best thing is for an email allowing me access to the, not the information, just an email to keep me updated. If you would please include me in email or send me an email so I can forward it to our city attorney to allow me information. Ms. Cecilia Johns, the floor is yours.
Somebody needs to speak louder here. I'm sure nobody back there heard what you said or what this gentleman said. It's just impossible to hear.
We'll speak louder, ma'am. I apologize.
That's all
The
right.
floor is yours.
Otherwise, I'm Cecilia Johns at 33175 Colorado Street in Yucaipa, and I'm here to remind you again, please follow the money. The recall movement started on January 9th with the devious manner in which Justin Bieber, Bobby Duncan, and Matt Garner forced Casey's departure, calling it a retirement. How stupid you think we are. I doubt that Duncan did this on his own. The new city manager was the brains behind the coup. I have been learning a lot about city manager Chris Mann, the political operative. According to a recall article I read on the Sentinel by Mark Goodclock on its website, Mann Communications celebrates itself essentially as a representative of developers and development interests seeking to move building proposals past the planning process and get them approved. In the last month, City Council approved 2 very controversial developments that have been previously denied. Why? I urge you to do your own research. Regardless of how it started, our new city manager has a big red flags surrounding him. I hope they aren't using taxpayers' money to do so. I urge everyone who cares about our beautiful city to follow the money. You'll see very soon who has the most to lose. Follow the money.
Thank you, ma'am. Joel McCabe, followed by Ms. Kathy Sellers.
Joel McCabe, 35581 Fur Avenue. On May 8th, I witnessed what seemed to be an outreach of support for our sitting city council. It was a counter-protest to the Yucaipa group, Save Yucaipa group. As I walked from my car to the front of the city hall, I saw maybe a handful of faces I knew and about 90% I didn't. It seemed strange to me as where did these people come from? Shirts that read, "I love Mayor Beaver," and signs stating, "We support city council and don't believe the lies we're all being carried around." I respect their right to protest without interruption and continue to look for familiar faces, which I could not find. With that being said, I sat in the second row behind two maybe high school boys that each held sign, one reading, "Recall is all lies," and the other reading, "We love Mayor Beaver." I stayed quiet and listened to these two joke and giggle amongst themselves. But what got me is they played video games and text the entire time the meeting was going on, like it was a big joke. It reminded me of a union strike where the union pays the picketers and they have no idea what they're picketing for. They're just there to make noise. Seems like this was a high school recruiting party hired or approached by some political marketing agency. I take the recall very serious, and I'm offended once again by Bobby Duncan's words, calling the recall group a Democratic group with liberal agenda, wanting to turn Yucaipa into another San Francisco. Absolute lies in that statement. Democrats in your district should be offended by your comments, as should be the Yucaipa group. Our efforts are to stop you and the current council from doing that exact same thing, turning this town into San Francisco. That's on you, not us. Mr. Duncan, I'm a strong Republican with good conservative values. You and your scare tactics to the citizens of Yucaipa disgust me. As a matter of fact, your shadow, Matt Gardner, identifies as a Democrat. Should he be offended by your statement? Or wait, he's a Republican. I mean a Democrat. I don't know. He goes both ways. So he plays both sides, confusing voters. Maybe you should ask him if he is a Yucaipa business owner. He's not. He lied on his application for council. Maybe you should ask him if he believes in rural living in Yucaipa, like he campaigned for, but voted for Heaps Serrano project and smaller lots and zoning, or the other Heaps project, 172 unit complex next to the Calamasa Elementary. Better yet, why don't you let him speak for himself and be his own man? As District 1 hears nothing from him and allows you to badmouth his district every 2 weeks, never once stepping up and standing ground. But that doesn't surprise me, as Heaps, Duncan, Mann, Snodgrass Farms seem to be calling the shots from behind the curtain. Your scare tactics regarding the recall have no one worried, as the Save Yucaipa group, transparencies and ethics outshine the city council and the new city management team. Stay strong, Yucaipa. Support the recall.
Ms. Kathy Sellers.
Hello, Kathy Sellers, District 1. Our greatest fear has been realized. City Council is allowing a political operative to run the city of Yucaipa as he sees fit, using all of his dirty tricks that he's known for. Whose great idea was it to send out an anonymous, deceptive, and threatening letter to the 200 citizens that signed the intent to recall? If you hoped to create fear and intimidation, I'd like to inform you that based on the comments I'm reading on social media, you did just the opposite. Not only are we getting inquiries on how to sign the next petition, the monetary donations are coming in. Be advised that numerous complaints have now been filed by the recipients of that letter with the district attorney, attorney general, and grand jury based on perceived voter intimidation. These are not a small group of people throwing temper tantrums, as was printed in that inane letter, but intelligent, astute, and engaged citizens coming together to reclaim our city. We've been authorized by the city clerk to move forward and circulate petitions and collect signatures, and we're doing it. That same city clerk, who was brought to Yucaipa City Hall from Canyon Lake by Chris Mann, is using our tax dollars to file a civil lawsuit challenging our reasons for the recall. This is another attempt to thwart our constitutional right to ask the voters if they want to replace 3 council members. All we are doing is asking to put forth a ballot and let the citizens decide. If a majority of voters don't agree with our statements, they will vote accordingly. To Joe Pradetto, our new Director of Government Affairs, Public Information Officer, and golfing buddy of Chris Mann, I find it alarming that you would make a statement in your myth versus fact chart that false allegations were submitted to the Fair Political Practices Commission and the District Attorney's Office and no evidence of wrongdoing was found. You also stated that although everyone is entitled to their own opinion, people are not entitled to their false and misleading statements. Be very mindful that the DA's office has not concluded their investigation and found no evidence of wrongdoing. Why would you make that false statement? To quote Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch, the concentration of power in the hands of so few may be efficient and sometimes popular, but it does not tend toward sound government. We, the people of Yucaipa, demand and deserve sound government. We will remain ever vigilant, intense, unremitting, and watchful.
Thank you, ma'am. So the next 4 speakers are speaking on item number 9, but don't have the ability to wait until item number 9 is heard. So I will call them in order during public comment as per their requests. First speaker, Ms. Patty Ingram, followed by Ms. Sally Schultzman.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. My name is Patty Ingram, and I'm the president of Yucaipa Pickleball. Tonight, members of our club have come to show their support for building phase 2 of the master plan. Wave, guys. Thank you. We chose to speak during public comment in lieu of item 9 because most of us want to get up early and go play pickleball. Over 2 years ago, pickleball was listed as the city's #1 budget priority. The first phase is finally under construction and should become usable this fall. I think it is important to recognize the continued cooperation and partnering that our club has done with the city. We generate approximately $1,000 per month in drop-in fees at the community center. We offer clinics to the community. The city even printed nearly a full page in their Yucaipa Community Services Guide regarding our club and the benefits of pickleball. As a partner in the Master Plan for Permanent Courts, we have donated engineering and research that will save the city over $100,000. Today, we have 2 reserved venues, 7th Street and the Community Center. Unfortunately, these are only reserved on weekday mornings due to conflicts with other sports. Between the 2 venues, we have about 60 daily players, where 20 to 30 are waiting at any one time to play. We are bulging at the seams. It may appear that pickleball is only for senior citizens, but I beg to differ. We just don't have the ability to serve those who are in school or work. Completion of the dedicated courts in phase 2 will open pickleball up to the entire community. It is one of the few sports that participants from age 8 to 80 or older can play. The question I get the most is, where can I play if we work or I have kids that want to play? I want to be able to say, 7th Street, we have permanent courts. At our last major tournament, 75% of the players were from out of town. Economic studies have shown that tournaments that bring in out-of-town players also bring in additional revenue for the city. This new money from outside creates income and jobs for residents, as well as increased community visibility and image. A larger permanent facility will only strengthen these numbers. We recognize that pickleball courts are one of many capital projects that the city must prioritize as you start your budget process tonight and over the next month. We want to assure you that we want to continue our partnership, participate in the construction where we can, both monetarily and with labor, and support you in your efforts. At your meeting in January, you challenged us to a game. Let's do it, and please keep pickleball a #1 priority. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Sally Schultzman, followed by Mr. Richard Rios.
I'm Sally Schultzman, 12955 Bella Vista Court. I've lived in Yucaipa for 33 years. I was first introduced to Yucaipa when I did a home visit on a frail elderly couple who lived in a mobile home park here. And I was told Yucaipa is a place where you go to visit your grandparents. Professionally, I'm a medical social psychologist and work primarily as a preventive care practitioner with the preventive medicine department at Kaiser. I was blessed to be on a cutting-edge medical team there. We help people thrive before it was just a tagline and a brand. I retired after 25 years of service, and I was able to get into some cutting-edge things here in Yucaipa. I served on the city's first Healthy Yucaipa Committee for 5 years and developed things like the Uptown Stride, which is a 1.25-mile health walk in the Uptown area, the Uptown Passport Adventure to help promote the health of our local businesses during the music and arts festivals, another committee I was a part of for a number of years. Yucaipa does really cool things. I'm also a founder of pickleball here in Yucaipa. I wish I'd known about pickleball when I was working because I could have had a much easier job. A study found that people who played 30 minutes of pickleball had enjoyed that 150% more than 30 minutes of walking. I could have simply prescribed pickleball and gotten much better compliance and healthier patients. Health benefits of pickleball are many. Pickleball is a natural, legal mood elevator. It's an endorphin releaser. Whether it's from the physical activity that we do on the courts or from laughing with one another while we're waiting to get back on the courts, our body excretes these endogenous opioid peptides and we feel much better. And so it's physically and mentally good for us. Pickleball is known for being an inclusive community, and it combats loneliness. And our 80-plus person will attest to it, saving his life. Pickleball helps you stay sharp. It's a fast-paced sport, and it requires split-second decisions, so it helps with your cognitive function and your memory recall once you learn how to keep score. And then it also improves your hand-eye coordination, but please do wear eye protection when you're playing. It's a good stress reliever. It distracts your thoughts from what's bugging you and allows you to focus on something positive and enjoyable. So it helps to decrease your cortisol level, which helps to increase your risk for heart disease. So pickleball helps your heart health. It reduces your risk factors. Specifically, it helps lower your blood pressure like petting a dog. It also helps with regulation of your blood sugar level because it helps with the production of insulin, which is really important in regulating your blood sugar. It can actually help to prevent the development of diabetes, which I think the implications of that are incredible. So I want to encourage you to please do the build out that we have coming. We've enjoyed the shades that you're doing there and
Thank
keep
you,
that
ma'am.
up.
Thank you. Mr. Richard Rios, followed by Ms. Betsy Wilson.
Good evening, Commissioners. I live at 35725 Bella Vista Drive, and I'm here to continue the discussion about pickleball. To let you know that there's some other advantages in the city that are happening now that you may not be aware of. They mentioned all the numbers of people that are playing pickleball both at YCC and at 7th Street. And our overflow, which amounts to about 18 to 22 people every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, are playing at Ice Street Park as an overflow because they don't want to wait in line at our other venues. And I wanted to let you know that at Ice Street also, we are conducting some youth clinics. We have youngsters coming in, signing up, and as mentioned before, we have a lot of out-of-towners coming to take advantage of that as well. We've had young people from Riverside, Fontana, the High Desert, come and learn to play pickleball at the facilities at Ice Street. We also have some adult beginners classes that we're teaching there at Ice Street because of the overflow, because of the need for courts. We also have some advanced testing for some of our pickleball players who want to advance to a higher level. We do testing at Ice Street as well. And one of the benefits of having us over at Ice Street too is that, like at 7th Street, we have a crew that cleans up the courts. So every time before play, somebody's out there blowing the courts, taking all the litter that's on the courts and picking it up so that the courts can be played on. And we have done some power washing at the courts over at Ice Street also, so that they're nice and clean. And I think one advantage that we also bring to the city parks is that we have a positive presence on the courts during the time that we're there. And we help keep out some of the undesirables because we're using the parks very positively and making sure that we're helping the city maintain them. And that's my 2 cents. So thank you. So keep the program going.
Thank you for your comments, sir. Ms. Betsy Wilson, please. Final speaker.
I will be the last pickleball speaker. Hi, my name is Betsy Wilson. I live at 35781 Avenue E. I just want to give you a little bit of how pickleball has enriched my life and my children and my grandchildren's lives. I started playing pickleball at 72, so for 3 years, I've been playing almost 4 to 5 times a week. So at 75, pickleball not only lets me remain active, it's also a big part of my social life because pickleball is a social game. And because I have learned to play pickleball, I have taught my daughter, my son, my 13-year-old grandson, my 19-year-old granddaughter, my 23-year-old grandson, and they all still play. So it really is a multi-generational sport that anyone can play. I also understand that at the 13-year-old school here in Yucaipa, it is now part of the 7th grade PE curriculum. So we have more lifelong players coming up right behind us. So if you would please consider keeping Yucaipa pickleball as a priority and consider how beneficial this game is to many of us golden agers. And for many generations to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. That concludes public comment. We will now move on to consent agenda. So that's items 1 through 6 of your agenda packet. Is there any member of the council who wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda? Hearing none, is there somebody who would like to make a motion?
I'll move.
We have a motion by Councilman Thorpe.
I'll second.
And a second by Councilman Venable. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries 5-0. Mayor and council member business reports. Is there any member of the council who wishes to report anything? No? Moving on to department reports. First department report, item number 7, award of contract for Avenue E street improvements. Mr. Kern, give me 1 second, please, sir.
Of course.
I have a late received public speaker comment slip for item number 5, which was on our consent. Ms. Terry Boone, will you please approach the podium? We just approved item 5 through consent agenda. I just received your public speaker slip, ma'am.
Okay.
So Mayor, you can take the public comment, and if the comment convinces you that you'd like to reconsider your action, you can then do that.
Please. Ma'am.
I think most homeowners are aware that their trash bill can either be paid for the entire year or can be paid through their taxes, their property taxes. I choose to pay for it for the entire year at once. And when I called Burtec Waste or Yucaipa Disposal recently, they told me that that's a year-by-year privilege that we have to do that. And it's based on City Council's decision about whether or not they will allow us to pay it separate from our property taxes. And I am here to say that I never want it taken away, the privilege, well, the freedom for me to pay my trash bills separately from the property taxes. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, ma'am. And if I read the agenda report correctly, that doesn't do that, correct? Nothing in the agenda report mentions that we would.
This is the actual lien list. This is a list of people who haven't even paid for their service for last year. What you're talking about will be coming to council on June 12th as the rates. But yes, every year you will have a window of time to prepay before it goes on, so it doesn't go on your
They'll
assessment.
never take that opportunity away from us, correct?
No, we'll bring it to council every year, but it's always been council's direction that we give the residents the opportunity to pay upfront so it doesn't go on the lien list.
Okay.
So June
12th.
Okay.
Please come and comment again, please.
But it's in there.
All right.
Thank you. Okay. All right, so consent agenda approvals carry as previously voted. So Mr. Kern, award of contract for Avenue East street improvements, Dunlap Boulevard to Yucaipa Boulevard.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, and good evening to the rest of you council members.
Privileged to be here and present for you our recommendation for the award of contract for the Avenue E widening improvement project. This project is one component of the larger Yucaipa Boulevard widening project between the I-10 freeway and 15th Street, which was split into 3 phases. Phases 1 and 2 were completed in 2020. Overall, this project represents an $11.2 million investment, which is the largest capital improvement project the city has completed in its 30-year history. On the screen before you is a slide that is an overview of these different phases. Off to the left portion of the screen in the blue shaded area is generally the limits of the Phase 1 improvements, extending from the Avenue E intersection. That widening took place all the way to the easterly 18th Street, as well as the traffic signal improvements at Chinaberry and the alley improvements on Ridgecrest Drive. Subsequently, on the right side of the screen here is the Phase 2 in yellow. That widening was performed between 16th Street and 15th Street, as well as the intersection improvements at 16th Street with the Highway Safety Improvement Program grant funding. Phase 3 is the remaining portion in between Phases 1 and 2 that requires right-of-way acquisition, and that will be the final leg of this stretch of the project that will be completed at a later date. Important to note that the Phase 1 improvements, the widening on the eastbound lanes did stop a little bit short of the intersection, and I'll talk about that a little bit more here in a moment, due to the right-of-way restrictions at this corner property here, the mobile gas station. The future widening of the intersection and traffic signal modifications at that intersection is planned to be completed as a part of a separate future phase of this project. And city staff has been a part of several recent discussions about the potential redevelopment for that particular corner property there. The next slide before you shows the existing conditions of this segment of Avenue E here between Dunlap Boulevard and Yucaipa Boulevard. With the recent development activity along Avenue E, as well as Yucaipa Boulevard, the larger Vantage 1 development, as well as the Chick-fil-A improvements here. The phase of improvements that were conditioned as a part of those the development projects were installed, and those are in place now. Essentially, there was a widening and sidewalk curb and gutter put in along the southerly side of the stretch, allowing for a through lane to be accommodated with the right turns coming into those properties there. And finally, here on the slide before you is the proposed widening limits in red. So those widening limits are between Dunlap Boulevard and then just to the east of Yucaipa Boulevard intersection. Again, we have that same limitation. So in yellow here on the screen before you is the section of widening that remains to be completed as a later phase that these proposed improvements recommended tonight will be transitioning to with those limitations in place. This section of Avenue E being widened would therefore be consistent with the general plan circulation element, bringing this street up to its full ultimate width. And the scope of work proposed with this project incorporates installation of curb and gutter, the widening along the north side there, small raised center median in between the Chick-fil-A westerly entrance and the main entrance here on Avenue E to the Vantage 1 site, extension of a storm drain line and catch basin over here closer to the gas station, as well as the restriping to accommodate the traffic new lane configurations here in this segment. Essentially, the widening would add this other traffic lane along the northbound side of this segment of road, including left-hand turn pockets into the development activities to help with traffic circulation, accommodating present and future growth in this area. Plans and specs were prepared by staff, and the project was publicly advertised on April 24th, and we received one bid on May 9th by Three Peaks Corporation in the amount of $326,326 for the project. That bid does meet the requirements of the plans and specifications for the project. Three Peaks has completed several city projects in the past, and the work has been determined to be satisfactory. Therefore, staff is recommending award of contract to Three Peaks for their bid proposal amount, as well as the $32,000 for contract contingency, $26,000 for project administration, inspection, and testing, for an overall project budget recommended in the amount of $384,326. And there is sufficient funding within the approved CIP for the Yucaipa Boulevard project to accommodate staff's recommendations. And with that, staff recommends approval of items 1 through 3 as listed in the report, and staff is available for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Kern. Good report. Any questions of staff?
Obviously that photo was taken before the vans showed up, huh?
Yes.
It's not going to be a car dealership. Okay, that's good. Is there a motion to approve item number 7?
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Councilman Venable.
I'll second.
And a second by Mayor Pro Tem Duncan. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries 5-0. Moving on to item number 8. This will be by Mr. Ben Matlock, award of contract for additional on-call professional environmental review services for private development projects.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor and City Council members. This is a continuation of a discussion we've had regarding the city's processing for environmental review under the California Environmental Quality Act in respect to private development projects. Over the past several years, the city has used environmental consultants for its public projects to help facilitate and streamline the process and make sure that those projects go through the review and approval process effectively. And then in 2020, City Council did amend or include as part of the on-call contracts the use of these consultants for private development projects. I do want to note that the use of these kind of consultants for environmental review is kind of universally applied in many different jurisdictions, including all those that surround Yucaipa. Just because the environmental review process, especially when it comes to making the MNDs or EIRs, these kind of larger scale environmental review documents, do have a lot of kind of specialized topics that they go into and can take a lot of time to develop. And so a lot of cities utilize these consultants where they specialize in that field to help facilitate the project review and to help free up their staff to do the customer service duties of reviewing projects, providing support at the counter and other duties as required, but certainly not tying up staff on this kind of specialized field with it. Most recently, this was discussed at the February 13th, 2023 City Council meeting to look at strategies that may work to address some of the concerns that have been generated with this approach, and really trying to find a business-friendly and cost-conscious approach to this. We did explore a few different options. One was, whether or not the city hires an additional planner that is the CEQA person, kind of beyond myself. I've worked on a bunch of EIRs and MNDs in my past work experiences, but I don't necessarily have the capacity, so we did explore that. But the review process kind of varies, so if we have a lot of projects that are subject to CEQA, they're going to be really busy doing a lot of heavy lifting for that, but then there'll be times where they don't. And so if that person is supposed to be the CEQA person, there'll be times where they're being paid for through the deposit accounts for environmental review projects, but there'll be times where it'll be on the general fund and the taxpayers then to subsidize that employment. And we did also explore the use of a contract planner that maybe is the CEQA person as well. Right now the city does contract with Michael Baker International. We do have a senior planner that assists kind of as needed on some certain projects to help manage the workload. As part of their review, their approach, because the CEQA process is a pretty contentious one, does represent some liabilities. As Michael Baker International does not want that to be as part of their scope. They want to make sure it's going through their quality control process because it is their reputation on the line. We did reach out to other smaller firms, including Civic Solutions, to see what their costs were, and it ended up being pretty much within the same range of costs as what our consultants were providing for their proposals. And so with that, we did do a new RFP just to get some additional firms, try to see if we have a little bit more competition, whether or not that'll change the rates. And so we did review. We received 10 proposals, and with that, staff did review them and recommended 3: Michael Baker International, EPD Solutions, and Reefville Lobos and Associates. These firms have done work locally or have been used by certain developers and peer reviewed through our consultants, and through that efforts were competitive, provided quality work, and so we felt comfortable that they provide the quality that's needed. There were other firms that we did receive where they were smaller boutique firms, and so they would be consulting with our consultants already, and so if they're paying for our consultants to do some of the studies and they're doing the work, the cost savings wouldn't necessarily be there. And then as part of it, we do want to make sure that because at the end of the day, the city is the one responsible for the decision on environmental review, that we have a robust quality control process, because ultimately it does represent a liability for the city in terms of processing these projects. We want to make sure that we're doing it right the first time versus doing it a couple different times, and spending both the developer's time on doing this, but then also to just making sure that we're providing effective customer service through that process. And kind of the last note, just as part of the discussion, is CEQA applies to discretionary projects, so projects that require, let's say, Plan Commission approval. And so those are what kind of trigger that. CEQA has gotten to be a much more difficult kind of law over the time. So when it was signed by then Governor Reagan in the 70s, it was kind of a much more scaled down as technologies improve, public comments have improved. That law has really changed, and so even as I put in there, former Governor Jerry Brown had joked that reforming CEQA is the Lord's work, and so it really is a testament to the process is difficult. We want to make sure we're doing it right, but ministerial projects aren't subject to CEQA, and so certainly more streamlined processes help avoid maybe some of the smaller scale projects, avoid having to go through this effort, and then larger scale projects where there is more environmental impacts are going through a process and disclosure that is beneficial for the community and the decision makers that are making those decisions. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Matlock. Good presentation. Is there any questions of staff?
I have a question. Under the previous city council, we talked about possibly hiring another staff member to do the CEQA evaluations when it was necessary in order to provide customer service. Are these three organizations here the solution to that sort of dilemma? Are these going to be prevailing wage services?
So they'll still involve contract proposals. In terms of staffing, because of the amount of time that's involved in the CEQA review process, is let's say for our initial study or MND, you could be spending, upwards of hundreds of hours working on one individual project. And so the caseload management is there'll be periods where they do have a lot of work going on and really not able to keep up with the demand. Or alternatively, there may be not as much activity, and so then the general fund, the taxpayers are paying for kind of the CEQA professional to be on staff, and that all still comes into play that there are technical fields, analyses that they may not have the expertise to do, and they're not necessarily going to be a biological expert at the same time they're an air quality expert. And so it's those niches is where there's still fall points that come through, and with how CEQA has been unfortunately weaponized for stalling projects and has made it a more difficult processes, at the end of the day, there really isn't someone that's going to be the jack of all trades that's going to provide the necessary quality of service for that. Again, I've worked as a generalist environmental planner, wrote many EIRs, but I still relied on a team of other professionals that help me do the work that was needed to be done, and so making sure that we're not selling the city short on that review and then leaving liabilities in that process.
So the three firms that we have already contracted with will be doing the public projects specifically?
So the city does have a contract with 4 different environmental firms, and so they would remain on being able to do the on-call for private development, but we're adding 3 additional. So there'll be technically 7 different firms that could bid on that project, and so using that to help maybe go, okay, if it's not enough options and they're a little too expensive, we're kind of balancing out a few different ways. And some of it really comes down to, on the environmental side, is how quickly do you want stuff and what is their workload? If people are trying to get through really quickly, that usually has a higher cost, and so being able to provide a little bit more flexibility with the staffing should in turn provide kind of a wider range of potential budgets to suit whatever the developers are looking to do. If they want to go quickly, all hands on deck, then we're able to facilitate that, but then certainly if it's a little bit more cost conscious, we're able to budget accordingly as well.
You have questions, sir?
I do. I believe it was back in February. I don't know if it was you, Ben, or if it was Fermin, but there were some comments about the on-call process. And I believe it was Mr. Heaps and his group had voiced some concerns about the process. I don't know if it was the process and or also the substantial cost difference between what would be done if it was in the city versus going through on-call. At that meeting, I believe one of you may have stated that you were willing to meet with him to see what those concerns were and see if there's any
so we did do
differences there that we could be worked on.
Yeah, so I was not at the city council meeting. I had the stomach flu, and my family did. But we did meet with Premium Land Development regarding that, exploring the different options that can come through in the exploration of the ideas of, let's say, using contract staff that does everything. So that's why I reached out to Civic Solutions among several other different firms that provide kind of a, contract planner. When I got their cost proposals of similar projects, it was within probably $2,000 of what our contracts that we were getting from proposals from our on-call environmental firms. And so there wasn't necessarily cost savings, and then certainly adding staff could be a solution, but it's not going to solve the entire component to it. We did reach out, again, recalled some of my other peers in other cities, and they kind of reiterated that the process works effectively with the on-call. We do have other developers processing projects in the city of Yucaipa, and their projects are on budget and on schedule by the use of the city's on-call consultants.
All right, thank you.
Is there any other questions of staff? Is there a motion to approve this item?
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Councilman Garner.
I'll second.
And a second by Councilman Thorpe. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
No.
Motion carries 4-1. Moving on to item number 9, budget status summary by our Director of Finance, Mr. Philip White.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Item number 9 is a budget status summary. It's the official kickoff of our fiscal year 2024 budget season with this item. What we're going to do tonight is review some of the financial trends over the last 10 years. Ultimately, as we go through this process tonight, it'll be financial trends. We'll get into some more detailed work as the week unfolds. Ultimately, you'll see a draft budget document at the June 12th meeting. So all of this will be informational to kind of lead up to the process of what you're going to see in the draft budget. With this item, there's a couple of things to note as we get into the budget document. There's really 2 key financial documents that you'll see throughout the year. The first is the budget. The budget sets the spending plan for the city for the year. And then to wrap it all up, you'll see an audited set of financial statements. The accounting rules for the budget development are different than the accounting rules in the financial statements. So they're both financial documents, but the accounting rules to set up the budget are different than what you'll see in an audited set of financial statements. So those are important to note. A couple of the key terms that you'll hear tonight and throughout the week is a budgetary surplus or a budgetary deficit. That is a reference to the budget document and whether the inflows exceed the outflows or vice versa. So if the outflows exceed the inflows, that would be a budget deficit. If the inflows exceed the outflows, it's a budget surplus. Second term would be a structural surplus or deficit. That is both a budgetary term and a financial statement term, but that's really recurring items. So that's excluding one-time revenues like ARPA, but it's the recurring operating costs versus the recurring revenues. So if the recurring items have a positive result, it's a structural surplus. If the outflows, the recurring outflows exceed the inflows, it's a structural deficit. And then the last term is just the GAAP financial statements. So there's accounting rules with the GAAP financial statements, and the key there again is the financial statement accounting is different than the budget accounting. All right, so here's kind of where we are in our task list and the summary of each. We started this process back in February of this year. One of the key things that we did to kick it off was each department kind of looked at their internal structure and considered where we were operationally and how we could better align ourselves moving into fiscal 24. So from a position standpoint, we each department looked at the personnel that they had, the personnel that they needed to operate most efficiently going into 24. So we went through that. The green lightning bolt means that we're through that piece of the puzzle. We also went through the process of gathering and costing city council's goals. And so a few meetings ago, you went through a list of operational goals. We've gone back to say, okay, these are the ones that we can incorporate. Others, we've said, okay, this is the cost to incorporate. And so we've gathered all of that information for presentation to you. We've also, from a finance department, gone back and reviewed our financial and budget policies. We've considered what the city has done historically, what the accounting rules are, and kind of reviewed those to say to what extent do we need to refresh those items and change our policies to move forward in a more clear and transparent way. Capital cost accumulation, that deals with a special piece of the budget that is not operational. It's more of a one-time thing, capital costs. We had some public comment earlier on the pickleball court. That's one of those items where those capital costs are approved by the body, and then they kind of carry forward year after year. It's not a one-time use it or lose it type of thing. So in the case of the pickleball court, while those 4 speakers came and spoke and asked for that to continue, that funding was set back in fiscal 22, and it's still carried forward. So through this fiscal 24 process, you're not going to be asked to renew that funding. That funding's already there. It's already been funded. It's sitting there waiting for that build to happen. So they don't need to worry about it. Moving on, project revenues. So we've gone through the process to say, hey, what are the projected inflows that we're going to get citywide? We've completed that task. We've also put together trend and forecast information. So I mentioned the trend information over the last 10 years, also forecast information to say, where are we going to be in 24? If certain things happen, where will we be in 25 and those out years? We've done that as well. What we will be doing, we'll be working with you to prioritize the fiscal year 24 activities. Depending on the information that is provided to you, we'll be making decisions to say, hey, this is what we want to prioritize, this is what we don't want to prioritize, and either adding or decreasing spending, the spending plan accordingly. And then ultimately that red item, that delivered draft budget, that is, as I mentioned, on the docket for the June 12th meeting. So we'll go through all of these things, and ultimately at that June 12th meeting, you will see a complete budget document ready for you to adopt. Okay, getting into it. As we go through this, some of this information is dense, so I'll just highlight a couple of things, but rather than being too wordy, I like the idea of just providing pictures so that you can see the trend information. Ultimately, finance's role is to provide the information so that you can make informed decisions on the spending plan for the city. What this shows is a 10-year presentation of the general fund. This includes the fire fund. It also includes all one-time items. So this is from a GAAP financial statement. This is a 10-year trend of inflows and outflows of the general fund. The dark blue are the inflows, the revenues. The lighter blue in the back are the outflows. And so back here, you can see it's all lines up pretty good. There's a little spike there. That was YPAC funding. So back in 2017, there was a general fund contribution to the YPAC. That's what that big spike is there. But typically, the general fund is the primary operating fund. So you don't really see a lot of capital. From time to time, you can make a decision to spend capital out of the general fund, which was done there, but ultimately that's all operating costs in the back. In the front is for these revenues, the key thing that I wanted to point out is right here in 21 is a key point in the history of Yucaipa finance. From a GAAP financial statement standpoint, that is when there was a deficit. In 21, there was all three of them. There was a GAAP financial statement deficit, there was a budget deficit, and a structural deficit that all kind of aligned right there in 21. Same thing in 22, and we're projected, even though these are not audited numbers for 23, we're still in fiscal year 23, we're projecting that deficit will continue from a GAAP financial statement standpoint. Kind of chopping that up to get a little bit more detailed. This is the same period of time. This is also the general fund, but what we've done here is we've pulled out the fire fund from this information, and we've also pulled out one-time revenues like ARPA. And so you can see similar trends, but those deficits, this is what you could look at and say there's a structural deficit, and that's identified here. There's a $3 million structural deficit in 21, 4.5 in 22, and we're projecting over 3 million in 23 from a structural deficit. That structural deficit gets a little bit hidden and obscured from the one-time revenues like ARPA. So in 21, we started receiving ARPA and programming ARPA, and so from our financial statement standpoint, it kind of closes that gap. One key thing to know is we are planning to program the rest of our one-time revenue, the rest of the ARPA, in fiscal 24. So as we look out to the out years in fiscal 25, without changing policy or doing anything differently, we could see these big gaps from a GAAP financial statement standpoint, as well as, these structural deficits will flow through because we don't have the one-time funding coming back in. Before I get there. So it's kind of tough to see with the bar charts, but there's a difference between the outflows in the back and the inflows in the front. And so what we're trying to do here is highlight that. So at the very bottom, that's 2014. Everything to the right is adding to our savings account. Those are year-end results. So back in 2014, we added $217,000 to our savings account. You can see it trends in the good up through 17. And then in 18, 19, 20, it starts dwindling. And in 21, you can see that deficit jumps to 3 million up to 4.2 in 22. And we're projecting about 3.2 this year. All right, same information, only this is the fire fund by itself. And this is an interesting one because you've probably heard that the fire fund has an ongoing deficit. That's probably familiar to you, but this really highlights it. And so in the back, you can see those costs really escalating quickly. The front is primarily funded with property tax, and so that's a real steady increase. It's increasing, which is good, but you can see that back column that increase is much steeper. And so if we were to look at that same type of chart for the fire fund, we can see that structural deficit starting 1 year earlier in 2020, but jumping quickly as we start into 23 and what we're looking at into 24. There's a significant jump in that deficit for the fire fund. Everything that we've talked about so far is all what we call general fund, and that's primarily what you guys hear about general fund. What this slide is highlighting is that the city has a whole bunch of funds where they're receiving resources and spending resources. You adopt budgets for all of these funds. That circle in the top left, that's the general fund. All of those boxes throughout are all other funds that are receiving and spending money throughout, on an annual basis. The reason that is important is because as we look at citywide activity, this information tells a slightly different story as far as the financial trend information. In those 3 years where the general fund is having a deficit, you can see that citywide revenues in 21 far exceeded citywide expenditures. In 22, it was pretty much lined up, and in 23, we're projecting a significant deficit citywide. But the interesting thing, where you did not see it in the general fund from 2014 to 20, you see it if you look at citywide information. You see, for lack of a better term, overspending citywide in all funds. And what those funds are primarily capital projects funds. So they're spending capital dollars, but those capital dollars aren't being spent out of the general fund. They're being spent out of other funds. And so when you're looking at the general fund saying, hey, we're approving spending on the general fund, it's important to note citywide, you've got all these other funds that are spending significant dollars. The other interesting thing is, as a city spends those dollars, the city's becoming more complex. It's adding different, not only buildings, but the accounting for all this stuff there needs to be more resources available for the accountants to track all of this stuff. There needs to be more police, there needs to be more fire. The city's becoming more complex. All of those staffing needs to operate a more complex financial city, all those costs do roll into the general fund. And so you'd see the ramp up in the cost in the general fund because of the previous spending back here outside the general fund. So it's not that there's more spending citywide necessarily, it's more that the build happened back in 14 through 20, and now the operations we had to ramp up operationally to maintain the investment over that period of time. I kind of like this slide. It kind of tells the story that I tried to put into words, but the dark red is the general fund costs. The pink is all other funds combined costs over the course of time. So you can see back in 2014, well over half of the city's expenditures were outside of the general fund. And in 23, we're on the other side of the spectrum where a significant portion of the spend is in the general fund. So when we look at structural deficits of the general fund, this kind of tells the story as we spent a lot outside, but now we're going to spend a lot inside the general fund. All right, jumping back over to the general fund. All of these costs get classified by what we call function. And so we'll go through a couple of slides that have these functions. So this is the public safety functions, fire on the right, police on the left. And the idea there is just the shape of the spending curve. It's ramping up as we move to the right. Those are 24 is the year all the way to the right, and so you can see the costs over the last decade are going up. If we were to look at all non-public safety functions, same type of shape. In the first 5, the one in the lower right, that's transfers and capital, and so you'll see that big spike back in 17 with the YPAC spending, but everything else, every function is going up. The key thing with this is this next slide is while everything's going up, this is kind of the overlay of all of those. So the top one, that's public safety, and the bottom ones are everything else. So everything's going up, but you can see public safety is over half the general fund budget goes to public safety, and that number is increasing quicker than the increase in all others. So public safety costs are increasing quickly. Here's the good news that I've got for you. This is the recurring revenue line, and then we've got a very nice steady increase in recurring revenue. Property tax revenue, sales tax revenue over the course of time is steadily climbing. And we anticipate that that's going to continue to increase. Our challenge as we move forward is going to be getting that recurring revenue to that curve to be even steeper, increase that quicker, while lowering our operating cost curve to kind of level that out. All right, so I know I jammed through a lot there, but our next steps are these 5 things. We're going to review the structural status and the forecast. We'll do that later this week with you guys. We're going to, this is kind of your list. You're going to provide feedback on the financial and budgetary policies. So we've gone through and revamped a number of different financial and budgetary policies. We're going to roll those out for you, going to get your input to make sure that before we implement these things that council is on board with them. You're going to provide input on prioritizing the fiscal 24 activities based on all the information that we've provided and kind of that trend information to see what the comfort level is as far as how comfortable are we to operate in a structural deficit. Do we want to shut down half of City Hall and stop it immediately? Based on our forecasts, are we comfortable over the course of time and kind of that balance of comfort? What are we going to do financially? What are our policies going to be? So we'll go through that this week as well. Then on June 12th, we'll review the fiscal 24 draft budget, that complete document, and ultimately you guys will be adopting the 24 budget at a point before June 30th.
Mr. Mayor?
Sir.
Thank you, Phil. That was fantastic. If I may, just a few points I'd like to emphasize. Really, Phil covered most of this, but just for emphasis. I think for a long time now, there's been a narrative in this town that the city is very conservatively run fiscally, that we have a very sound budget. We have tens of millions of dollars in reserve, and that our revenues exceed expenditures, and our budget's just generally in great shape. And I think that was true for a very long time. I think it started to change probably around 2016, 2017, when the city began to build a lot of projects. And in order to build those projects, what the city did was take general fund revenue and loan those funds to what are called development impact fee funds. So development impact fees are established by the city. When development happens, developers pay into these accounts, these DIF, we'll call them accounts. And the idea is that development will pay for the costs of the increased traffic or infrastructure that's needed, right? And so the money goes into those accounts, and then it's spent out of those accounts to build infrastructure. But what the city did instead was, because it wanted to build infrastructure and facilities on the front end instead of waiting for development, it loaned money from the general fund to these DIF accounts, and then built things like the YPAC and the police station and parks, right? And basins, right? With the idea that when development does come, developers will pay into these DIF accounts, and the DIF funds will reimburse the general fund, right? So in years past, when you look at the budget and it looks like the general fund has $50-some million sitting in it, it really doesn't. That assumes that includes the debt that's owed to it, right? It assumes that those monies get paid back to the general fund, right? The problem is that it takes many, many, many years for that to happen, assuming that the development that's projected ever comes to fruition, right? And so the city spent down the general fund to build these projects and is now waiting for development to happen to pay them back. But the city's now built an awful lot of things, which is great. We have phenomenal facilities in the city now, but facilities cost money. And so now we've increased the burden on our general fund to staff these facilities, to maintain the facilities, right? And as the city's grown, we've also had increased need for police and fire, and those costs have increased steadily over the years. And so Phil presented a lot of good numbers, but to me, what I'm really looking at to try to determine the health of our budget is, let's look at our ongoing revenues and our ongoing expenditures for the general fund, all in. Fire, everything, all in. Our general fund entered a structural deficit in fiscal year 2019-2020, right? In that year, we had a deficit of about $136,267, right? In fiscal year 2020-2021, that structural deficit increased to $3.4 million. In 2021 and 2022, the deficit increased to $4.6 million, okay? This current fiscal year, it's estimated at about $4.4 million. Now, the city, in a way, was saved by COVID the last few years because there was an influx of a lot of one-time grant monies, ARPA, CARES Act, et cetera, millions of dollars, right? And so although we had a growing structural deficit, the gap was plugged by those one-time grant funds. So that when the budget was presented, it looked like we had a balanced budget. But in reality, we had a growing structural deficit that desperately needs to be addressed, right? We have about $2.2 million left of the ARPA funds that haven't been spent. We can program that this upcoming fiscal year, but then that's it. Our luck has run out. So we're in a situation now where we're projecting a multi-million-dollar deficit this year, and it will be significantly worse a year from now when we're looking at the budget. It's an issue that we need to address. We need to be honest with ourselves and with the community about. We need to figure out how we're going to solve the problem. It is not really entirely a spending problem. I mean, this city runs extraordinarily thin in terms of staff. Staff is spread thin. The community has grown significantly. The staffing levels have not kept pace. And frankly, the deficit is so large that if we eliminated the entire city's payroll, it wouldn't be enough to solve the problem, right? So development that's already slated and already being built is going to help, like the restaurants that are opening, the hotels that are going to be opening, that will help. But we'll also have to get creative and look for other solutions in the future.
Mr. White, I'm going to call up a public speaker real quick, but I do have more questions for you following that public speaker. Mrs. Ingram, I apologize, I can't read my writing.
Oh, sorry, they said I couldn't speak, so Shar Brisba's gonna speak on my behalf.
Shar, perfect, Shar.
Hi, Council, Mayor, Mr. White. I'm Shar Boersma. I'm on Council of Yucaipa Pickleball. I'm the treasurer and webmaster. So we just had a clarifying question regarding the pickleball courts. So the first phase was approved and funded, and we wanted to know about the second phase, if it needed to be approved or not. Thank you.
Mr. White. Maybe you can go ahead and address her question, and then I'll have some questions for you as well.
Yeah, I think that I might defer to Fermin. I know that there was several $100,000 that was programmed. I believe that the remaining amount is close to $300,000 left to continue the build, but I'll pass it off to Fermin.
Yes, there is funding program right now for phase one. And if I remember correctly, it's about $400,000, and that is to complete the phase one improvements that City Council approved as part of the concept plan. When City Council approved the concept plan for pickleball, there was also a phase two that was reviewed, which included additional courts, potentially a restroom, and there is no funding program for phase two at this time.
Thank you. And I actually shuffled through and I saw another speaker slip for item number 9, so Mrs. Donna Snodgrass.
I think my questions are being answered. Can I defer comments until you're finished with the staff? Because I had several of them answered already. Thank you.
Certainly. All right, Mr. White, back to you. It's a good leg workout, up and down, right? All right. I'm sure our healthy Yucaipa person is watching you gauge your squats in, and I'm sure he's very pleased. If you don't mind my asking, how long have you been on staff?
Since November 7th.
Okay. And you were trained by our previous director of finance?
Yeah.
Okay. This is the first time I've seen this Can you try to help me understand why why I was looking at what appeared to be a balanced budget for the last 2 years since I've been on the council, and now I'm looking at something that would indicate that we need to start eating top ramen instead of caviar?
Yeah, sure. The budget document at any organization, well, not any, but most, it's a complex document. There's a lot that goes into it. And to the extent that, I guess the narrative associated with it can be, there's a lot that goes into it. And there's not enough time in the day to go through in detail, which is why I like to see the trends. It's just something that I like to do is see the trend over time, just so that, when you're looking at words on a page, there's a lot there. But if you look at, general fund is important. So you look at the general fund over the course of 10 years and you can see trends. And then you look at, okay, everything outside the general fund and you can kind of see trends. And then to work with the finance team to kind of partner in that understanding, a big picture, global understanding and how we move forward is what we're striving to do. And I can't necessarily speak to if this is the first time you've seen it, why you haven't seen it in the past, but our role is not to create narrative. It's just to provide the information, give you guys enough information so that you guys can make educated decisions, and that's what we're striving to do.
True enough, but every staff report I read starts with the first heading of recommendations. So certainly staff can make recommendations. This is the first time I've heard the word deficit be thrown around so much. And considering this trend apparently could have been tracked for the last at least 4 years.
Sure.
How come one of the recommendations over the last 2 years wasn't staff recommends that council tighten the belt and stop acting like a bunch of fat cats? Something along that line would have been helpful to break it down for the layman who, like me, has a hard time counting to 20 without my shoes off. So I'm curious to know, was it intentional? Or was that asking you to speculate too much?
Yeah, I can't speak to that. I can speak to what we're doing this year, and it's really to provide the information in as clear and transparent manner as we can. These are complex documents, and I can say that there's a lot that goes into it, and the term deficit has a negative connotation if you don't hear it often, right? But there's context with it, and there's in certain cases, just like in the old days, the term debt had a negative connotation, and there's in certain cases where financially it makes sense, and there's times when if we were to look at the citywide budget historically, if somebody were to say, hey, citywide, we're running a deficit, that would have been a true statement. But it's an investment, and there's a purpose to it, and it's part of the plan. And so, again, I can't speak to what's happened in the past. I can tell you our process up to this point and what we're striving for, and it's just to be clear and transparent.
Would you recommend that we tighten the belt? It's time to start looking strategically on how we can increase revenues and
as a standard answer from the finance department, tightening the belt is always a great idea.
Mayor Pro Tem Duncan.
So, I'm sorry. So I've been here since 2012, and the process that I was familiar with from 2012 through about 2016, 17, was that each year we would get we'd get a budget, and the policy was, or what we always were dealing with, was income, expenses, and then every year for 4 or 5 years, 6 years maybe, we would show like a 52,000 plus. And then mid-year, staff would come back and say, okay, we have more now, and we might have $100 million more than we anticipated in revenue. And so at that time, we would then decide as a council what to do with that money. We never really decided to save it. We typically used it for projects. We spent it for different projects that we didn't anticipate at the beginning of the budget year. In 2017, or right before 2017, we were planning to do something with the YPAC. We were planning to build the YPAC. So we went out for bids. No, we did engineering bids. and I forget exactly what month that was. And the engineering bids came back at $9 million, $9 million some change. I remember that number. And then went 2 years later, we decided to go ahead and get bids again, and we discovered that the price went from $9 million to $12 million, $11 million. And so at that point, we had a problem. I never really knew, I really didn't know how we solved that problem, but I could see from your chart there that in 2017, the income was this and the outcome was that, and that's where we borrowed the money or we did something with the money to build the YPAC. We didn't borrow any money to do it, we used our own funds to do it. And it looks like that's when we started this trend of borrowing money from the general fund to DIF funds, to development impact fee funds. And then each year at that point, based on what I saw, we were going in the hole at that point. And I'll be honest with you, I looked at the budget every year and I never understood, I never saw that. It was always, but the trend of showing a positive like 52,000 or 42,000 or whatever each year, that changed when we went from the budget showing the fire fund separate from the general fund. When that merged, I never really understood why it merged, but when that merged, all of a sudden the dynamics of our budget changed at that point. And I know the cost for fire and police has gone up dramatically as per your chart. So I really don't know when this happened. I know that the 2020 sort of, the COVID thing was a real problem and everybody was panicked over that, but I never realized that we had this type of a problem. And when you showed me on that chart the accumulative debt or the accumulative money that's really not money that we can use, but it's rather been spent, but we're showing it as an asset, I really didn't understand that completely. Yeah. But now I do. So now I know what to look for on the draft budget. But this whole thing was, Mayor Beaver's been here for two and a half years. I've been here for 10 years, and I had no idea that we had this problem. Now, I don't know if the previous financial committee, we had 2 council members on the finance committee, they met and then brought recommendations to this council. I don't know what they understood or knew, but I didn't understand this, and I didn't know this was the case at all. I didn't know this until you brought it to my attention 2 weeks ago.
So, and real quick, perhaps I'm being too facetious at times with my ignorance on numbers, and while I will admit I struggle with math, I can read an Excel spreadsheet. And the problem is, when I've looked at the budget for the last several years, it appears to be an Excel spreadsheet. At the bottom, it shows zeros. It shows that we have a balanced budget. So it's not that I'm misreading, it's that I was being mispresented. There appeared to be a balanced budget for the last 2.5 years, and that does not appear to be the case. And I find that very vexing, that I almost feel intentionally misled to believe that we were in a better spot than we were. And now I'm being told that we're in a, well, look, there's too many numbers to the left of that column.
Yeah. Now, Mayor Pro Tem, there's a lot there, so I'll pick them off one by one, and you can remind me on the pieces that I miss. But one of the key differences between a gap set of financial statements and a budget document is a gap set of financial statement has an income statement and a balance sheet. A budget document only has an income statement. And so the numbers to the right are good results that would add to the balance sheet. The numbers to the left are things that would take away. And so to the extent that the general fund lent money out to other funds so that they can spend on things like the YPAC, to the extent that that occurred, it still shows up as an asset, as you mentioned, in the general fund. So you don't necessarily see the spending go out because it's still sitting there as an asset. There's something coming back. The budget document doesn't show that, and so the budget document can say, here's the activity that we're going to do this year, and this is how we're going to fund that activity. And to the extent that it was demonstrated that the spending is happening, there's current year revenues that are being used, but there's also savings account money that's going to be used to fund the rest of it, so that you get a zero on the bottom of the page. The key there is to understand there's a dipping into past savings to fund everything during that 1 year to make that zero at the bottom of the page.
So when I first got elected to the city council, the big statement of pride was that the city of Yucaipa never borrows money to build our projects. We save our money, and I'll remember it till the day I die. We save our money, and then we build a project, and that's when you see it dip down, and then we start saving again for the next project. But based on what I've seen here tonight, I'm not sure I understand that correctly.
I think that they're both true. This kind of shows it. Oh, one too many. Where the city of Yucaipa has a healthy investment portfolio. It has cash. It's not all in the general fund. It's spread out through all the funds. And to the extent that there's no outside debt associated with any of the build that's happened throughout the city, that's a statement of fact. That's true. If you isolate the general fund has loaned out money so that those things can happen. And it's dependent on, for it all to work, it's dependent on a couple of things. One is development coming in and everything kind of coming together so that the general fund benefits from ultimate property tax value increases in property tax and sales tax from other development. The revenues associated with that will build up the general fund. So it's ultimately an investment of the general fund, help another fund build something to later on, way down the road, collect the revenues for the investment.
So that's going to show up on a budget as an asset?
That big picture of the future revenue will not show up, but the outflow of dollars from the general fund to another fund won't show up on the budget, but it will show up on a set of GAAP financial statements. So when you look at a GAAP financial statement, it'll look like a very healthy general fund. You look at a budget and it looks like all the costs are being funded either through current inflows or dipping into savings. And so it all kind of lines up. But to understand the big picture, you kind of have to piece them all together to see these trends. And so I'm not saying that it's a simple process. It's a very complex set of things. But the thing I like about the pictures is if you see a couple of the pictures, you can kind of start piecing it together.
Did our auditors know this?
Our auditor, absolutely, yes.
So our auditors, the audits that we approved every year, they knew that this process was going on?
Yes. Oh, that reminds me. So you mentioned started with the white pack. It actually started as the oldest financial statements I could find before the accounting rules totally changed and they look totally different. Going back into the early 2000s, 2004, there was always an interfund loan between the general fund and the development impact fee funds. And so it started way back when those other funds would build a project, and I don't even know which projects, City Hall? So back when City Hall was built, those funds would overspend. The general fund would say, here's your cash to finish the build, and then they would carry the receivable, and as those funds got revenues later on, they would repay it. So it's gone on for forever, since 2004, I don't know about forever, but since 2004, there's always been a balance that ebbs and flows, mostly ebbs with building. And so as City Hall was built, police station, YPAC, the basins, all of those things use this funding. And to the extent that there's not enough available cash, the general fund historically provided that cash. In I want to say fiscal year 2020, maybe 21, the auditors did say this interfund relationship it's too much. We want you to demonstrate that those things will be repaid. And so the governing body at that time formalized these interfund loan agreements and also capped that method. So the last couple of years, we haven't used this model to fund capital because those were capped. You can't, the city can't, from a policy standpoint, can no longer take general fund dollars and backfill that.
So it's safe to say we're broke.
No, we're not. We're not. It's just the investment over the course of time. We have a Currently, at the end of our last fiscal period that was audited, 22, we had a $22 million investment from the general fund to other funds to fund this stuff. We still have.
So we were borrowing money from the general fund. We were also borrowing money from different, say, accounts and moving money around to make the general account or the general fund look like it was balanced. I mean, that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, so the general fund had cash. The other funds that built spent cash. To the extent that they spent more cash than they had, the general fund would say, here's a loan. Here you go. Here you go. Pay us back when you get it. Pay us back when you get it. And so the general fund, all of these funds, the dollars that they hold, are not in separate physical accounts. The city pools its investment portfolio, and from an accounting standpoint, we track fund by fund who has the cash and who doesn't. So
it's like tricky. It's like you guys are moving money. It just seems a little stinky.
No, it's generally accepted accounting principle. It's GAAP. That's the way it does it. But going
How's
back,
our public safety? Are we good? Are we totally broke? We're in a deficit, a massive deficit on public safety. Are we going to be able to, fund that? What's the deal with that?
So from a public safety, do that overlay. In 24, we're projected to have a cost of over $20 million for public safety. The fire element of public safety has its own accounting mechanism. So we've carved that out since the city incorporated, and we've treated fire by itself. So the equity associated with fire is at the end of 22 was $9.3 million. In fiscal 23, the year that we're in, we're anticipating a deficit of $1.3 million in fire. So at June 30th of 23, we are projecting $8 million of equity associated with the fire operation. If we were to look at police is wrapped up into the general fund with everything else. And so from the general fund with everything else, yeah, the general fund has $30 million of cash sitting there and also has a loan receivable of another $22 million. And so we're not broke. We're healthy financially. But from a trend standpoint, now we've kind of crossed over the last 3 or 4 years to start eating that stuff up. And so before we eat it all up and are broke, we want to create the policy to
yeah, but those graphs don't show that we're healthy. It shows we're in a major deficit.
These are 1-year operating results, and so there's no balance sheet. But the balance sheet at the end of, should have brought the financial statements with me. I want to say at the end of 22, the general fund had $50 million of equity. And so these operating costs are increasing quickly. Their costs are outpacing the inflows, but up until 2019, 2020, the city was always adding to those savings accounts. And so they were always adding. Now we've turned the corner and we're not. But for the first, 30 years, we were adding. So we have the general fund, roughly $50 million of equity that is now getting eaten up.
So this basically started in 2022?
The deficit for the general fund started in 2017.
That's what I saw. Yeah.
You're asking me all the tough questions here. Give me 1 second here.
I've got it here, Phil. So when you're looking at the general fund, including fire,
yes,
in terms of ongoing revenue and expenditures, it was fiscal year 2019, 2020 that we first entered the structural deficit.
And that's why we were trying to get that half-cent sales tax passed on that Measure M, was because of the rising cost of fire and police. We needed revenue to cover that cost so that wasn't coming out of the general fund.
Correct.
So it sounds like to me a lot of smoke and mirrors.
Yeah.
So let me put it this way, and I have to be careful here how I phrase this, but I think, as I said before, there's been a narrative in this town for a long time about the health of the city's budget. And I think there was probably a desire to continue that narrative. As a city manager in any city, 4 or 5 years ago, I would have been panicked. And I would have said, guys, listen, we got a real problem looming. We got to solve this problem, right? And I would not have presented a budget to you that looked balanced without making sure it was crystal clear to you and to everybody in the room that we have a structural deficit, we got a problem that we've got to fix here. Smoke and mirrors, in a way, but not to suggest that there was anything illegal done. That's not it.
When I first went to the financial meeting, I told you that I think that we have a problem. That's the first thing I brought to your attention. I said, this is not, we're not as healthy as what we think. And I told you that, just by looking at all the numbers and everything. I'm a number guy. But
Balanced council.
So that was my concern right from the beginning, and I told you about it.
Yeah.
And so now it's come to a head.
Mr. City Manager, you've been sitting in that seat for a few months now.
2.5.
Yeah, 2.5 months. When did you first learn of this? And was there? I know, and from speaking with staff, that we've been undertaking some kind of a large financial obligation as it relates to data entry and data input. Why the delay? Why 2.5 months before we're hearing this? I understand we're nearing the end of a fiscal year, and this is when we talk about this. But if there was, you made mention a moment ago that if.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's a good question. So I started March 1st, and one of the first questions I asked of our finance director when we sat down the first time was, okay, where am I in the city manager department budget? We're getting closer to the end of the fiscal year. What do I got left? And kind of grinned, and he said, I wish I could tell you. The city has been, over the past months, in the process of transitioning our software. It's a citywide software. We're going from a software called Eden to a software by Tyler called Munis. When I started, we were in the middle of the finance department specifically transferring everything over from one software to another. So as data was being entered into the new software, but it was really only maybe 3 weeks or so ago that we had the full picture, right? We had a budget meeting, the director and manager level staff that sat down around a table, and Phil presented kind of where we were with the draft budget. It was the first chance we all had a look at the big picture financially, and it was eye-opening. Incidentally, I was told it was also the very first time that all the staff were able to sit around a table like that and talk about the whole budget.
So, you arrive on March 1st, but you've lived in the city for a while now. Certainly you could have gone online and looked at our budget and found the same information out. Is this public knowledge? Can somebody who's more in tune with city finances be able to find this and see that there's a growing problem?
Well, as Phil mentioned, if you look at a budget document, without the gap analysis, it's a little difficult to connect those dots. The numbers are there. I think in terms of the council and the community, we can't expect the average person to be an expert in government finance or to be a government auditor, right? So to look at a budget document that's maybe 6 inches thick and be able to connect all those dots isn't probably realistic. I think it's the job of your finance director and your city manager to come to you and say, listen, here's what these numbers mean. We've got a problem.
Let me rephrase. You're right. It's difficult to expect an average citizen of our city to be an expert in government finance, but I do expect you to be. And on March 1st, when you entered this building for the first time as the city manager, did you know that we were in this situation?
I knew that there were things in the past budgets that concerned me, and including the current budget that we're operating under. Those things included the fact that we seemed dependent on one-time revenues to balance the budget. I did notice that. The fact that we had spent almost all of our ARPA funding with really little to show for it. We were using it just to plug the holes in the budget. That concerned me. I did notice the trend of borrowing, the general fund lending money to the diff funds. That concerned me. So I had those conversations with Phil when I first started. I don't think anyone, including myself, understood the scope of the problem until about 3 weeks ago or so.
And forgive me, this might, Madam Assistant City Manager, I need some historical perspective then. Were you aware that this was a problem in the years leading up? Were you aware that the word deficit was going to be thrown around so eagerly?
I think Mayor Pro Tem Duncan hit it on the head, at least what staff, when they started to perceive we had issues, especially with the public safety budget. That's why we took the 1.5 sales tax measure and had multiple meetings with the community. We have been driven we've been project heavy since 2008. The community center came on in 2001, City Hall came on in 2004, the fire station 3, police department, then YPAC. So, and then the basin projects have come on in addition with other special revenue funds. So I think what has been presented to council in the past of the thought process is if you help build the infrastructure, development will come and it will help offset. And I think both Chris and Philip have explained that concept, and now at this point we're kind of dependent on development to come in to refund the projects. But the projects have been beneficial. It's brought people out of the floodplain corridor, and there have been city facilities that have benefited the public here. How it's presented and how it's truly understood, I guess, is the conversations that we're having now. And I think Philip has done a fantastic job presenting to a layman what it all means, and maybe that has what we've been lacking in the past.
Okay, so the next question, and this is we're starting to dabble, and I at the risk of making this meeting longer than it already is, we've kind of committed over the last year to some pretty extensive projects to come. The one that pops in my mind most notably is a match grant for about $9 million to a library. Where do we stand? Because I know we have friends of the library who I'm receiving emails this week regarding their enthusiasm for seeing a library being built. But I see so much orange to the left of this column. Well, that's the fire fund, but in the other slide, it becomes concerning to me as how we're going to match a $9 million grant from the state, even when we form a coalition with the county and the school district. It appears almost impossible. Mr. City Manager.
Yeah, in relation specifically to the library project, it is a challenge. We anticipate at the end of the day that's going to be approximately a $25 million project. So while it's fantastic that we have a $9 million grant from the state, we have to figure out where the rest of the money comes from. School district is offering use of land that they own, but have told us that they're unable to commit any cash to the project. The county up to this point has told us they might be willing to put in $2, maybe $3 million. I will tell you, I don't think it's realistic to expect that the city is going to be able to kick in a whole lot of general fund monies for this project in the next few years. The other challenge is this grant money from the state has a drop dead date. The money has to be spent and the library has to be operational by 2026. So we don't have a lot of years to try to put the financial puzzle together. That being said, we do have a couple of creative ideas that we are going to pitch to the county at the end of this month. We have a meeting with the county CEO, Leonard Hernandez, that might entice the county to step up to the plate and play a very large role in getting the library built. We've got a couple of tricks up our sleeves that we're going to try. We're not giving up on the project just yet, but I would not expect that we're going to be able to spend much, if any, general fund money on the project.
And there's substantially more costs being requested of the council at almost every meeting relative to other, activities in the city. I know that we're being requested by Little League all the time regarding lights and masts and the maintenance of fields. It's a lot of money that needs to, that our community deserves, quite frankly. They deserve to have these facilities maintained in a way that they can be enjoyed as per their original purpose. I look forward to seeing these creative ideas. I think it's going to be incumbent on the men on this dais to maybe be more engaged with our counterparts in the county and in other areas of the public sector to help come together and create those coalitions to help us fund some of this stuff.
Let me say also too that the problem is primarily in the general fund, right? As Phil mentioned, there are other funds and there are other revenue streams and there are grant opportunities. So this doesn't mean that until we figure out the problem, all spending has to stop, right? I mean, we still, for example, when we're talking about road maintenance, we still have gas tax, we still have Measure I, SB1. So it's not that we have to put the brakes on every project and every program, but particularly when it comes to general fund spending, we need to be very careful in the next couple of years.
So then I will ask publicly of you two gentlemen specifically. I have a year and 7 months left on this council, absent the recall being approved to kick me off. Don't intentionally mislead me, please. Let me know what's going on. If you need to say and use plain English that we need to tighten the belt, I understand that and I can comprehend that. I'm confident that I can pull the wool out over everybody's eyes in this room when I start talking about matters of public safety and historical analytics of crime and how it's okay and it's safe, because I'm an expert in my field. You're an expert in your field, and so are you, sir. It's the reason you're sitting and standing where you are. I depend on you, and the council does as well, I'm certain, to provide us with realistic information, factually accurate information, in a way that we can make the best decisions for the future of the city, in a place that when I'm dead and gone and my grandkids are running around, this isn't Adelanto. And if there's somebody from Adelanto in the gallery, I apologize for offending you. Is there any other questions of staff on item number 9 before I ask of a public speaker? Mrs. Snodgrass?
Thank you. Donna Snodgrass, Walnut Grove Court. There was a lot said, so I took some more notes. How much income are we receiving for the fire side from what used to be County Service Area 38 before we incorporated? We're still getting those county taxes for that, aren't we? So just write it down. I don't know, maybe tomorrow you can answer that. It appears that the accounting practices that have been in place have caused, or at least the reporting of them, have caused some severe consternation. It allowed in 2019 approximately $300,000 embezzlement from the city, and that was discovered in 2019. The bottom line, is our savings account empty right now? Or do we have reserves in savings account? And the generally accepted accounting principles, is that practice been in place throughout the years, or has it just been adopted? And were there audits done regularly for compliance for the GAAP practices? And where are these audits? What were the results and where are the audits? And one last question. How much has been loaned from the general fund to the DIF fund, to the development fees? And how much has been paid back so far from that DIF fund? And I think all the rest of my stuff was answered.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. White, can you please offer some clarity?
Yeah, I'll go through these one by one. The question on the revenue associated with fire, yes, there is revenue. From a policy standpoint, the city council committed, is the accounting term, committed 35% of property tax revenue to be used for the fire operation. And so every 35% of any property tax revenue that the city gets carved out, sent over to the fire fund. Roughly, I want to say that number is approaching $5 million, but I'm going to go back and double check that. But 35% of all property tax is dedicated or committed to fire. Where also that is one of the items on the one of the policies that you guys are going to be receiving is a fund balance policy, and that specific item is included on there for kind of a cleanup. The embezzlement was mentioned from a running lean standpoint. Running lean is fantastic from a cost saving standpoint. It depresses costs because you're running lean. You got less people in the building. From an internal control standpoint, running lean is the worst thing to do from an internal control standpoint. And so what happens from a running lean standpoint is you don't have, from internal controls, you can't separate duties, and you open yourself up for bad things to happen. Specifically with that case, the city went through the process of saying, how can we make sure that this never happens again? From an ongoing scenario, part of my role is to continuously monitor the internal controls and make sure that that those are in place, and to the extent that we're missing something, come back to you to say, hey, we need to invest in something to not allow something bad to happen. But that is the sometimes it's carried as it's kind of a prideful thing to say, yeah, we run lean and mean, and we figure it out and get it done. It's true. The downfall of that is one person can do too many things and bad things can happen. From the savings account standpoint, our savings are not depleted. We have the treasurer's report that you'll get next meeting. We're approaching right around $60 million of cash and investments in the citywide portfolio. From the question on GAAP financial statements, yes, every year the city has their financial statements audited. The opinion that's rendered on that is considering if the financial statements are presented in accordance with GAAP, and the city has historically received a clean audit opinion related to that. So yes, that's done annually, and the city has, to my knowledge, never received anything but a clean audit opinion. Back to your question on, did the auditors know? Yeah, the auditors look at this stuff, and they said, did you tell everybody about it in accordance with GAAP? And they've said, yes, you have. And then the last question was related to the DIF loans. Currently, that number is right at 22 million. It's a balance sheet number, so it ebbs and flows over the years. I think the highest it got to was 25 million, and now it's down to 22. Obviously, it started at 0 when there was nothing loaned, but since 2004, ramped up to about 25 when the auditors said, no more, you gotta pay it back. So 3 million has been paid back thus far, down to 22. And some of the policies that you'll be seeing are geared accelerating that repayment as well. So.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions of staff? All right, this is a review of the budget status, so no vote is required. Thank you, Mr. White, for presenting the budget in clear terms. Mr. City Manager, thank you as well for bringing this to our attention. We're going to move on to item number 10, which is the public hearing. So I will open the public hearing at 8:13 p.m. This is annexation of tract map number 14429 into the City of Yucaipa Landscape and Lighting Maintenance District number 1, Zone EE. Presenter is, who's our presenter? Mr. Preciado.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and council members. As you mentioned, this item is the annexation of tract map 14429 into the Landscape and Lighting Maintenance District. As you're aware, many residential subdivision projects in the city, they do include public areas and infrastructure which primarily benefit the homeowners in that subdivision. And those public areas and that infrastructure require maintenance, and it can incur utility costs. The city's Landscape Lighting and Maintenance District, or LLMD, was formed in 1991 through the approval of City Council at the time. The LLMD does provide a funding mechanism to cover those maintenance and utility costs for those public areas that primarily benefit the homeowners in that subdivision. All residential subdivision projects are required to be annexed into an LLMD or create a HOA. Again, to fund the maintenance and the utilities for those areas. The developer of this tract, Tract 14429, wishes to annex this tract into the LMD. This tract is located near the intersection of Bryant Street and Highway 38 and is called Mountain Gate. I want to point out that this subdivision is a subdivision that was approved back in 1991, and as part of those conditions of approval, it was required to either be annexed into an LMD or form an HOA. It wasn't until 2005 that the map finally recorded that created the 57 parcels or 57 lots, and in 2019, the building of the homes began when a local builder took over part of the project and initially they built the first 10 homes in that subdivision. For this subdivision, the LMD will include about 538,000 square feet of landscape maintenance, the entry gate maintenance for the 2 gates at the entrance to the subdivision, and the electric service for 6 streetlights. The developer's engineer prepared an engineer's report that provided the estimated annual cost for the maintenance and also for the utility costs. An excerpt of that report is included in your agenda packet for consideration. And by annexing this tract into the LLMD, each of the 57 lots in the subdivision will be assessed $1,638.79 per year, and that's based on the engineer's report that was prepared and reviewed and approved by the city. Consistent with Prop 218, it is necessary for the owners of the 57 lots to vote on the annexation, and a ballot was provided to the owners 45 days in advance of this public hearing. As part of the annexation process, the city must conduct a public hearing regarding the proposed assessment and consider any and all protests against the assessment, and the city shall not impose the assessment if there is a majority vote to not annex into the LLMD. As of this afternoon, 50 ballots were received in response, 47 of those ballots supporting the annexation and assessment, and 3 of the ballots received were in opposition. The ballots that were received in opposition did cite that they were provided an estimate for the annual assessment in the amount of about $1,260. That was provided to them as part of their escrow when they purchased the homes back in 2019 and 2020. These homeowners opposed the annexation since the actual assessment that was included in the engineer's report is higher than the estimate that they were given in 2020. Staff did meet with one of the homeowners and spoke to another homeowner, and they did indicate, and they did actually provide a copy of a document that they signed as part of their escrow back in 2019 and 2020, where they, by signing the document, they agreed to consider annexing into an LMD, and that document did include a cost estimate of about the amount I mentioned earlier, $1,260, but that was an estimate. There was no engineer's report prepared at the time. And again, the discussion with the homeowners, in that discussion, we did explain the process. They did provide some possible solutions to address their concerns. And we did look into some of those, and you may hear from some of those tonight. They did indicate to me that they were going to be speaking during public comment. And again, I just want to point out that it is important to note that the actual assessment amount isn't determined until the engineer's report for the LMD is prepared. And the engineer's report for this particular subdivision was prepared and approved in March of this year, so a few months ago. The proposed assessment amount is $639.79. So staff's recommendation is that City Council conduct a public hearing and subsequently adopt resolution number 2023-13 approving the annexation of track map 14429 into the city's LMD and adopt the methodology for the assessment and enact the assessment. That concludes my report, and I do want to mention that there is a revised resolution that was handed out to tonight, and it's also available in the back of the room for the public. And again, that concludes my report, and staff is available for questions.
Thank you, sir. Applicant and representative presentation. We're the applicant? No? Applicant representative presentation for the LLMD. Okay, moving on to public comment. I have 2 speaker slips. The first speaker is Mrs. Heather Obeer. I was going for ladies first in the name of chivalry, but I will allow for the deferment. Mr. Mike Obeer, am I pronouncing that right? Obeer? Obeer? Beer, perfect. Okay, sir.
All right. Is it, when it's green, it's go?
You just go.
All right, go. Good evening, City Council and City staff. My name is Mike Obeer. I reside at 34611 Canadria Avenue in District 1 of the City of Yucaipa. As you can see, I'm here with a lot of my neighbors and friends. I'd like to thank Councilman Garner for taking the time to speak with us and email us and try to help us out through this and give us some guidance on this. Basically, our dispute is that we're being asked to pay 35% more, 50% more, and then over 10 years in excess of 100% more than what we were given an estimate. In addition to that, there is a COLA up to 5%, as we understand it, tagged onto this that we never agreed to. That's the bottom line. So it's your discretion whether you want to raise that. We get that, but in 10 years we could be paying 100%, 150% more than what we were quoted with no ceiling on it. So the confusion here comes from the fact that we were given the ability to occupy, and the land was developed without an engineering report. It's kind of being done backwards. City staff has been terrific. So we just come before you. We've noted this error has occurred, that it needs to be fixed. Our proposal and the solutions that the city engineer has presented with solutions is we're just simply presenting a 2-tiered LLMD in 1442. Basically, something close to what we were quoted with some kind of no cap situation, preferably, or a cap situation presented, like a COLA that's not 5%, something like that. Basically, it's no surprise that the ballot passed with 47, or there are approximately 47 yes votes, because that's what the controlling interest in the development owns still, right? Why we didn't cast a ballot, it was useless. Our contention is that we have no vote to put forward because we've already signed on to a different agreement. We're not opposing the LLMD. We do not want an HOA in its place. We simply want something that's fair, that's closer to what we signed on to. We have handouts if you'd like those, again, I can spout to you, but again, this confusion, I think, came from the fact that it's a 2-developer development. We're going down to 1 developer now. We think that's going to help with city staff. So we do think this is very solvable. In an evening of a lot of problems that maybe you weren't able to solve tonight, this might be one you can do. All we're asking you to do is press the pause button on this. Let's hold off opposed to the LLMD. But thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Boom.
Ma'am?
He pretty much covered it all. I'm Heather Obeer, obviously reside the same address, 34611 Canadria. But I would just like to ask, there's 7 of us basically that fall under this right now. There's 5 of us present. So I'd just like to ask Dan, just so that you can visually see that we do, we're all in this together. And all we're asking is that it is recognized that we were basically misled by the previous developer. This was part of our escrow paperwork. It was part of official documents that we signed as part of our escrow paperwork that, you know, we were agreeing to a certain amount, and now we're being asked to pay more. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Muller?
Hi, thanks for hearing me. Christine Moeller, Fawn Ridge Place. I know these folks. I sold them the home. I worked for the developer in those few years, and I think it's very fair what they're saying, because when we did market it, there were no fences, gates. There were no gates, nothing like that. All there was the LLMD that they had signed for. And basically, that is from the outside of the block wall. So it's not as if it benefits them directly. It benefits, the aesthetics of the community. And I do believe, and my personal opinion is, I don't think anybody should have a final given to them by the city or a notice of occupancy until these things are addressed. I don't think it's fair that these folks have lived in their community for a few years. They built a custom home. So, it's important that you know exactly what your costs are before you go into something like that. So to raise something like that, to raise their LLMD, which is supposed to pay specifically for that area, which is all planted with low maintenance things. So it's just requires just a little bit. So I think that it is fair that there's a two-tier, because these folks all signed escrow, closed escrow, without a gate, without those type of in there. So, the folks here that occupied them before the second builder came in, it's only logical that they should expect to pay what they bought, not something that was changed over time that's going to increase their costs, and that's how I feel about it.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay. Mr. Preciado? This is where I would have an applicant rebuttal, but I'm going to defer back to you if you'd like to comment on the comments.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I can certainly try. I was listening to the comments, and I was doing the math here, the gate, and just out of curiosity, I was wondering what the cost of the gate maintenance would be per year per unit, and it's about $213 a year. So the estimate that they were given when they purchased a home was $1,259, and the proposed assessment is $1,638, and the gate would be some of that difference. And I know that for the gates has already been installed, so that those are already in the process of being built. I do know that the idea for the gate is something that was considered after some of the homes were built, which is why the maintenance of the gate was included in the engineer's report completed in March of this year.
Okay. Mr. Fisher, yours. I'd like to offer you an opportunity.
My name is Daniel Fisher. I am representing the current owner or the original project that originally developed it from the ground up. I think I believe that their concern is very valid. One of my trips to the project multiple times is that our LLMD budget has quadrupled. The cost of, we were just going over it again today. Every day that we put off engineering, planting, everything that it is to do, costs that go up every day. So if we put this LLMD off for a year or 2 years, that assessment is going to keep going way up. That's the danger in the prolonging nature of this stuff.
Very well, sir. Thank you. All right. Are there any more speakers, ma'am? None. Any more comments by staff?
No more comments by staff.
Okay. I will close the public hearing. The time is now 8:29 p.m., and now it's time for the council to discuss. I do have a question. How many, that tract map, how many total structures will be occupied at build-out?
57.
57. How many are currently occupied?
I don't know the exact number, but I would say 15 to 17. No.
Mr. Fisher, do you have that answer by chance?
There's at least 7 to 9 from the previous builder, and then there is 7 occupied.
All right, so for the benefit of the internet community listening, the residents of Mountain Gate are indicating that there's roughly 9 occupied from the previous builder, 7 currently. 16 total. All right, so 16 total out of 57. Okay. Listen, not a fan of changing up even estimates. I mean, I would tend to agree. These folks thing with the belief that they were paying a certain amount. I don't think that there's not options here that we can all come to a middle ground. I believe, while I recognize the necessity to bring this before council, I believe maybe we're a little bit premature. I would ask that this go back to staff to work with the developer and the residents to find a way, if there's explore whether or not a tiered option can be carried out in a manner which the current 16 or 17 are locked into a certain amount based on previous estimates before improvements were made to necessitate the increase, and perhaps a second tiered LLMB if that is even feasible. I'd like to see that go back and be hashed out before this body makes a decision. That's from my seat. But if any of you want to comment.
Mayor, can I address it just from a legal perspective? I did see the document that looks like it was provided to the purchasers by the builder when they were buying it. It is an estimate. The requirement for an LLMD has been a condition of approval on that property since the 90s. I agree with Christine Muller. The LLMD should have been formed by the builder before any homes were sold. That is how this normally goes. You normally go into a property knowing exactly what your assessments are going to be. That being said, the process exists for it to be formed after. While if the council directs a study of a 2-tier system, I'm sure that's something that staff can do. I want to let you know we can't set the assessment higher than the engineer's report. The engineer finding about what special benefit each parcel receives from those infrastructure and facilities, and we charge that amount to that parcel. The council could direct that you go lower, right, which is what I think is being proposed, and I completely understand why it's being proposed, but that difference has to come from the general fund. That's your option. Your option is either the people who live there, who receive a special benefit from the landscaping and the street lights and the gates, pay for the special benefit they're receiving in the amount that we can justify, or the general fund subs that difference, and all the taxpayers of Yucaipa pay for that. So I want you to kind of know what the legal landscape is as you guys look at what discussions you want to have. I mean, at the end of the day, it's 9 homes. It's a couple $100. It's not the end of the world. But it does set, I think, a pretty interesting precedent for us. And as they mentioned, those costs are anticipated to go up over time. The state of California is littered with landscape maintenance districts that did not have escalators built into them, and which are now effectively useless because the cost of maintaining that landscaping so far exceeds the amount that's allowed because they didn't include the escalator. We have jurisdictions that are ripping out the landscaping and putting in bare dirt and saying, that's what your assessment pays for now. So it's not a problem today, but it could be a problem in the future.
The problem I see is these folks bought a stock base model car, and after they left the dealership, they were told they're paying for the Bighorn edition. And I have a problem. they bought what they bought, knowing full well, and then the developer continued building things that benefited the community that they had no interest, they had no information on, is from what I understand. If I'm misspeaking, tell me now. But if they bought something, understanding what the neighborhood would look like, and the developer continued to add improvements that would cost money, this is concerning. You're changing the deal after the deal's made.
And I can't speak to the conversations that the buyers had with the builder and the sellers of the property, right? I can look at the document that was provided. I can tell you that in other contexts where there is an agreement between the city and a person to annex, that is usually a recorded document that goes on the property and that very specifically outlines there will be an engineer's report, there will be an annual assessment. This document was not between the city and those buyers. It appeared to be between the builder attempting to get an estimate. The last thing I would just point out, and I think it was already said, was, I mean, the city's own landscaping costs have gone up that much in the last 3 or 4 years. That's just because of the rapid inflationary environment that we've all felt in. So those are just some thoughts, Mayor. I understand where you're coming from on it, but I wanted to give you the legal view.
Gentlemen?
I agree with what Justin was saying. With one aspect, I don't know if we can set it a percentage or a cap, understanding that it'll go up. But I think with them coming in, not having the full picture, that's something we need to consider with this, though. So a two-tier system, something.
So the cap of 5% is that the council approves, but the council on an annual basis makes the discretionary decision whether or not to do that, is my understanding. So, you could look at it in the future. Again, I think, especially after the last presentation you just heard, I think that the recommendation you're likely going to get from staff is full cost recovery, but that's going to be a choice for you.
I'm not as concerned about that, recognizing that the city's residents on, Skyline Road, in theory, do their taxable landscape mountain gate. So I recognize that the general fund shouldn't be burdened with the landscape costs as they rise, because that's the America we're living in right now. So I'm not as concerned with that. My initial issue is that $1,200 roughly to $1,600 change. I'm not a fan of changing the conditions of the deals after the deal's made. I don't like that. Now, for the people who don't live there yet, yeah, I guess you're going to pay more. Perhaps if that's a possibility. But the people who sign an estimate, I feel like you're negotiating in good faith. Somebody put forward an estimate, and I could see if it was, hey, we estimated it's $1,200. It's actually $1,250. That's close. But we're looking at $400 and change annually. I think that's more than I'm comfortable with.
So if we pump the brakes on this for a couple months, you guys can come up with something to resolve this whole thing? I mean, because like you said, if we don't get it here pretty soon, the costs keep on going up. So is it something feasible that if we voted to pump the brakes on this for a month or two to come up with something? I mean, would you guys be?
Councilman, yeah, I think talking with the city attorney, there might be one or two things that we could do creatively. If you'll give us a couple months to work on it back and see what the options are. Councilman
Garner, does that sound okay to you?
Sounds good to me. I also think it's not right. They got a price, and now they're going to raise the price. So how much does it go up per year?
Is it somehow tied to the?
Did you say 5%?
It's tied to the CPI, so it can go up to 5%, but not higher.
5% a year?
Consumer Price Index.
Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem Duncan.
So is that increase built into the contract that the 17 folks signed? Was it 17 so far or 9? So was the cost of the increase, the ongoing increase of cost, was that built into the contract they signed for $1,200 and some odd dollars?
So, Mayor Pro Tem, I'd hesitate to characterize it as a contract in the form of a notice, letting them know what the estimate was going to be. Looking at it, it did not include any information about an escalator. It said what
So
the
there's no
estimated annual.
escalator in there, ones that they signed?
In the notices they were given, it did not an escrow.
So basically,
And I would say, this is why we form districts before we start selling. I agree with Christine Muller.
We did this with Serrano Lake before they even broke ground.
It is
I
a
think.
very routine process, Mayor.
but
It
this-
gets a little dicey when builders sell houses before they form the districts. I agree.
Yeah.
so you're almost going to have to honor the $1,200 and some odd dollars on the initial sign up. I mean, when you buy a house and you have all your disclosures and you sign everything, I mean, mine is, if you're told it's $1,200 and some odd dollars, that's what it should be. And then on the future houses, they should pay more. There should be a two-tier system. I don't see any other option.
So, do you want to vote, or is just direction enough for our discussion, or do you want to vote to say no to this and then
If
come
you
back?
want to vote to continue this
Yeah.
to a date uncertain, we'll have to renotice the public hearing if it comes to that.
That's fine.
But if you want to give a chance to be creative, we can try that. But we do need to get something formed out there.
Certainly. Madam City Clerk, does this need to be a roll call vote or a traditional vote
So what are we voting on?
to continue? To continue to allow staff more time to bring back a.
Are we talking 2 months?
No, it's going to be longer than that. The wizardry I have in mind takes time. So that's why I said date uncertain. You're likely going to have another public hearing that you'll have to hold, but we're going to have to do an engineer's report. We're going to have to do another notice of intention. We're going to have to come up with a methodology to fairly apportion things differently. We're going to have to make sure that we can do that all lawfully. And we'll be back here with the same thing, but if we can, you'll have a different resolution in front of you.
Very well.
Mayor, if you can close the public hearing and announce the time, and then maybe a motion and second to continue this item if council.
So I closed the public hearing at 8:29 p.m.
Okay, thank you.
Which is why I'm not going to have another public speaker. The public hearing has been closed at this time.
Thank you.
We've moved on to council discussion. At this time, we will do the vote. So my motion is that we continue this matter hearing to a time to be determined while staff works diligently and creatively to find a amenable solution to this. It was done altogether out of order and making us have now uncomfortable decisions up here while we decide whether or not people need to pay more than they originally thought they were going to pay. That is my motion.
Is that going to compound the folks that signed the $1,200? Is compound it because now instead of 12, it's going to be 19? If we wait 3 months, 4 months? I mean, you said the costs are going up, right?
So the costs are going up. The direction that I thought I heard from this council, that you wanted us to attempt to come up with a methodology that had the 9 purchasers who signed the document saying rough plus or minus 12,000 for that to be their assessment. So plus or minus. Finance is over here, guys. I'm the legal team. Finance is over here. Plus or minus.
I think 12,000 and 1,200 are, it's a little big.
12, oh, so I said 12,000.
Correct.
Lawyers, right?
Lawyers.
Okay. 1,200 plus or minus.
Yeah, correct. So there was a motion made by me. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
No.
All those?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Try that again.
No.
All right, motion carries 4 to 1. All right. Is there any announcement from the council?
No.
No. Folks, thank you for coming out. It's always easier to sit up here when we have from our community. Please be safe. I'm going to ask that our city manager work with our public safety officials to form a public safety committee meeting very soon. I think the rise in crime hurt some of our citizens, and we need to address that, whether it be strategy or better press releases and briefings to address whether or not it is targeted acts of violence or random acts of violence. Too many questions around why Yucaipa is appearing in the news so frequently with violence and just heinous acts that are despicable. Public Safety Committee meeting has been idle for a little bit too long, and we need to ramp that back up and start answering some questions to our constituents. That's my announcement. Again, folks, thank you for coming out, and the meeting of May 22nd.